All right. So, well, let's get going.
Okay.
Well, basically, like this is was my initial thought. What I would love to discuss today, and probably you will find this topic interesting in your audience as well. But let me know if you wanted to discuss like something, maybe something else, right? So, what I would like to discuss is what I call, I don't know, like if this term exists, but what I call like an enterprise DevRel. And what I mean by that, uh, doing developer relations and for developers who are working at large companies. So it could be enterprise, like a bank or insurance, right? Because they employ these days a lot of engineers. But also it actually goes down to any kind of large company, even if they call themselves startups. So let's say if you talk about Temporal.io, right? You work with such large companies, I guess, like Spotify or something like that, right? So those are kind of several thousand people companies, obviously, and they told them to start startups, but anyway, they are actually the enterprise. It's more like an enterprise. And so does like doing developer relations for this group of developers who work with these large companies, like any different from an average, let's say, developer relations, right?
Okay, that's a very broad question. It's interesting. Basically, there are a few topics that come to mind when you ask me this question. So the first one is very easy. Are you using a bottom-up strategy, right? Can people sign up for free, try you out, and then basically start using you without the CTO knowing? And this is a very common strategy called, I think it's just called the bottoms up strategy, where like you can magically launch in like 20 different teams all across the company, and then suddenly once you have enough data, once you have enough users across the company, then you approach the C level and say, hey, do you want an enterprise deal where we give you SLAs, some organization admin audit log features, you know, the typical enterprise features that every company has. So in that sense, if you're doing bottom-up strategy, it's basically no different than a normal small startup, small company strategy, right? Because you're essentially treating every single team as a small company, right? So maybe that's not so different. That's the first topic. The second topic is, what kind of problems are you solving? Are you solving problems that only enterprises have? So things like monorepo tooling, you know, something I think about a lot is source graph. Are you familiar with source graph?
Yep.
Only companies where the code bases are huge and there's so many so many different teams that you have all these like interrelated dependencies. Only those companies have source graph size problems. So naturally, when you do DevRel, you naturally gravitate towards bigger companies like that. Yeah, so I mean, that's one thing. And then the final piece, which I often think about as well, is there's a lot of internal training that needs to be done. So in a sense that once you've landed in a company, you want to expand in the company. And having an internal champion is very helpful, and working with them to do in webinars, info sessions. So I'll just give you an example. We as Temporal were invited to the technology council of a major bank, where it was like 120 VPs of like technology, or you know, heads of IT were at that meeting, and then we had to present to them as exactly the same pitch that we would normally do anyway, but customized for that bank. Like basically you swap the logos or something like that. But essentially the idea is that someone at the company already likes you, and now it's your job to DevRel within the company, right? So to expand within that enterprise. So that's what we did.
So what you're saying is basically a little bit kind of interferes with the customer success function, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so usually it's the function of customer success team to kind of expand, right? When you already have
there's customer success. There's also solutions architects. These are all similar positions. I mean, you know, I have a company. My company has 40 people. We do not have separate customer success. We do not have separate solutions architect. They're all just DevRel. That's fine.
Oh, okay.
You know, yeah. In the future, so maybe I think in the previous startup that I had that was in, we started having customer success when maybe like 100 people, solutions architects as well, maybe in the 100 to 150 people range. So it depends what stage you're in. Obviously, these things are fluid. People are performing these roles whether or not it's their job title.
Yeah, well, let's actually talk about Temporal. So, I mean, the product you have is first, like, correct me if I'm wrong, is first and foremost, it's not something that small companies gonna have, right? Those kind of pain points. It's more about when you have like a large distributed application, right? So it's probably the big infrastructure or the high load or something like that. And the second thing, all right, like you have this problem, but how do you, as an individual developer working in this company, you can actually make a decision to use Temporal inside this product because it's so core, right? It's kind of you have rewrite everything, like and this product sits in the core of your product, right? And it's like a crucial part of the infrastructure. So I mean, this is what I mean by Enterprise DevRel, right? It's not like I don't know, like I don't know, even like Twilio, when you okay, like let me put my credit card, let me send this preppy SMS, and basically that's it, because it doesn't like influence the other parts of the product. Yeah, I'm as a developer, I have a right? I'm authorized probably to start using this product, but I guess like as an average developer, like a non-senior, not executive level, non-director of engineering level, like whatever, I'm not authorized to start using, let's say, Temporal because it's too core for the product.
Okay, so that's the question. So I'll start off with the first one. There's the assertion that, or I guess there's the image that you only get. By the way, I think there's a bit of feedback in the audio because I can hear myself. Okay, not just large enterprises can benefit. We do have companies of about 10 to 50 people paying us. Just to give you an idea of size, right? Because we solve the general orchestration problem, and if you do microservices, anytime you have 2, 3, 4, 5 microservices, you already start feeling the pain if you have something where you really prize reliability. You want a general framework to do retries and timeouts and timers, anything asynchronous. So it's not just enterprise. So we are lucky there in a sense that I don't think we have as enterprisey of a problem as source graph, where like I still don't get the value of source graph. And even though I'm friends with Biang, like the CEO, like I just don't, I haven't used it for work. I just think they're amazing because they're a unicorn company just solving this very specific issue. Okay, so the second question was something about how do people decide to use us? Okay, yeah. So the first thing is they basically build greenfield projects with us, where they want to try us anyway. They like the idea. They're not going to rip out existing work to do that because that's too mission critical, right? Now, and this is untested, untrusted technology. But they're willing to try us on greenfield projects. So at least we can make that very easy. We do offer design consultation, essentially saying like, okay, you're proposing this internally to build it. We want you to succeed, so we'll offer you in 1 hour with our our head of product or CEO, CTO, whatever, to make sure that you got the design right from our point of view, right? So and when people when people succeed with their proof of concepts, they get more evidence that this technology works, the tooling works for them, the way of thinking, the stuff that they can make at a much cheaper cost and they can test with much higher confidence, which is exactly the marketing pitch that we have. Once they've seen it for themselves, they're much more confident moving it into their main code base. That said, we do have one large social media company that is trying us out for one of their core features as the first implementation. So the story there is that it's a mix. I think part of this is a bit hard to follow, but it's the reasoning that if it can take the largest workload, then it can take any workload. So they're using us as like they're using their main use case as a stress test. Essentially, they have their existing architecture and they're using us. They're trying us out as a sidecar thing. So implement these things in parallel, and if we show better results, better reliability, better code or less lines of code, whatever their evaluation metric is, then they'll switch over, right? So you can implement in parallel and then do a switch. But the other thing that they are really the other thing I hear a lot is that their current process is so buggy anyway that they are no worse off. So for us, we are lucky enough that we are picking a problem where people mostly handwrite the alternative to us. So they handwrite some scheduling, they handwrite some state machines in their databases, and they sort of stitched everything together with manual orchestration. They don't really have a framework or organizing structure to this, whereas we essentially spent 15 years, across Amazon, Microsoft, and Uber thinking about this stuff. So they say like they have confidence because their existing tool is so broken anyway that they need to retry it. So that's why people at least have confidence to move those central workloads, even though. So I get your point, right? Like Twilio is not central. It's like the last mile, like last API call, right? You just send the thing, fine, whatever, easy to try. But we are so central because we are the orchestrator. So we are hard to try out. So people try us out because their existing system is broken, or they try us out because it's green fields or something like that. There's always a way to make a rationale. I think what you really want to do, though, is you want to capture the mind of the developer so much that they think of you. Like, we never propose any of this. Like, they come to us with these ideas, right? But what we sell is the idea that this is a better way to organize your microservices. And once people are sold on that, they'll come up with all sorts of rationale to use you.
Right. So, I mean, like, that definitely makes sense. So if you have some greenfield project, or you can build this thing aside from your core framework, then it makes it easier to try. All right, like, yeah, I got it. So it makes sense. But how do you do you target, let's say, any developers, like all of them, or you can segment your audience? Like, who do you target? Because obviously, okay, as a developer, I probably every developer probably worked at some point of his or her career with microservices, right? I mean, that's kind of almost anyone, right?
Yeah, I would say this one we're still figuring out. Right now, it's very easy to segment by language. We are mostly Go and Java, and a little bit of PHP. And then we're trying to launch TypeScript soon. So straight up, bottom line, if you don't write those languages, then we are not for you for now.
Yeah, by the way, Java is mostly the enterprise language, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. One way to target enterprise developers is just have a Java SDK, and then you're really strongly signaling that you have a Java mindset. For us, and we're not even doing that good of a job. We want to eventually work on Spring Boot integration in the future, because that seems to be the highest demanded Java sort of framework to integrate with. But anyway, so you capture those developers that know they have an orchestration problem in those specific languages. We typically say our target audience, our ideal audience, is sort of the senior developer, maybe 10 years of experience, who's rolled many of these systems before, so they instantly get the pain points. Whereas, if you're a more junior developer that hasn't done this before, you may be not very impressed by our Hello World example, where we do like a bank money transfer example, where we do a distributed transaction, because you don't know what a distributed transaction involves. So yeah, that's where we are right now, and that's actually not a good thing, right? Because the target audience is pretty small. You need a fair amount of background in order to understand the value of this thing. So eventually, we want to get to a point where it's just a default solution. Like whenever you do any long running tasks, you just have this by default. So it's this question of like, how do you cross the chasm from early adopter to the early and late majority, where right now we are still having to explain how we work under the hood. But eventually, when you cross over to the majority, nobody cares. They just care whether you work or not, and they care who else uses you. You know, all these like superficial things. But that's a sign of success when like the not so involved people, like you should not have to be a distributed systems expert to use us, right? Like that's the ideal goal. Right now, you probably have to be nerd sniped a bit, at least by what we talk about. Now we talk about things like Lampard locks and stuff like that in our meetups. And wait, is it? I don't know. So one of the locks. Anyway. So yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. And so, how do you acquire this? How do you reach out to these distributed system experts? I mean, is it primarily like SEO or word of mouth, or it's a community, right? Or what are you using?
Okay, so this one, we have an unfair advantage in the sense that our founders, so our CEO was tech lead of what became Amazon SQS, and our CTO was tech lead of Azure Durable Task Framework, so at Microsoft. So a fair amount of just reputation wise, if they're doing this today, people will eventually find them, right? They're like, because whatever they were using in the previous format, they want to know like, where are these people now? They find us, especially from Cadence, which was a fairly successful open source framework, right? So there's that, and then there's speaking at conferences. So again, our CEO has done a fair amount of like industry conferences for people who are in this field, which is like this Facebook Scale conference, and I think some of the like the InfoQ or that kind of conference medium. Not a lot. Like he's not like a super established speaker or anything, but he's done enough that when he's introduced with some level of like, oh, this is not a nobody. Like this is someone who's done these sort of large scale messaging or asynchronous work systems at all the big corps for longer than you've been alive, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there's amount, and then so we now as a dev experience team are trying to do more media outreach, right? So I had my head of products on Software Engineering Daily. That's 30,000 listeners a day on
Software Engineering Daily. It's like a newsletter.
It's a podcast.
Oh, it's a podcast.
Yeah. And I think we did a couple other podcasts as well, but those are smaller ones. And then some conference speaking. So we're going to be speaking. We have 2 speakers at KubeCon this year, and those are all Enterprise people, and that's a few tens of thousands of people, I think. I'm going to be presenting. I'm a fairly well-known speaker in the React and JS field. So when we launch our TypeScript SDK, I already have 3 conference talks lined up for me to present. So we'll be doing a fair amount of outreach. I think at some point, there's also a fair amount of word of mouth. So let me show you, by the way. So I'm recording this for audio. So it's not like a super great medium, but I'll just show you, like when I was researching this tool, I actually pumped in one of the competitors. So Netflix Conductor is a competitor to us, and I put it on Hacker News, and it got voted up, and people started commenting on it. When you have good Hacker News SEO, it's really influential. So the first comment says, "I set up Conductor, blah blah blah. Wasn't impressed by it. We started using Temporal." recently, right? So so, and I don't know who this guy is. They just like they volunteered this comment, right? But whenever you get organic stuff like this, where you post something and then someone else like mentions it in the comments, and we get this quite a bit. So this is real word of mouth that you cannot pay for. And if it happens again and again, I think you just get. I mean, I don't know how many users we get on this, but definitely some, right? Like this is the best recommendation you could possibly get.
Yeah, but I mean, like this is the point where you enjoying already existing word of mouth. But how you started it, this word of mouth? How do you get like from 0 to 1, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll honestly say that I wasn't here for the 0 to 1, right? So and at every point in time, this project has had some unfair advantage. So you want to use as much of your unfair advantage as possible. For us, it's just the legacy of like how long these people have been working on this problem in previous companies. So that's the 0 to 1. And then so when you start the company, you're already not at 0. You already have a lot of goodwill from people. Then obviously after that is you have to just make them happy with your products, right? So I don't think there's any shortcuts here.
Yeah. All right. So, well, again, like we talked the awareness part, right? So you create awareness from mostly speaking and reaching out developers media and leveraging your founders kind of thing, right? So those are the main channels, the main ways you increase awareness, right?
Yeah. I think, okay, I'll give you one more thing, which I've been working on. I don't think we're doing a very good job of this right now. But if you're talking about creating word of mouth, creating the or users organically sharing you, help them. Literally give them the slide deck to present in their own companies. So like here's like a slide deck template you can use. Here's a 1 sentence pitch, here's a 1 paragraph pitch, here's a 1 page pitch. Here's like all the pre-done case studies that you can show to your management. Like literally think about it from the point of view of someone's trying to promote this within the company. Someone already likes you. What resources do they need, and how much effort is it for them to pull all this up? So I have a list of slide decks. I'm trying to even think about things like holding office hours, where the only thing you do is help people with their pitches. That's something that we had internally at Netlify, which I thought was a really nice idea. The problem is not that many people volunteer to do this. So you have to beg and ask them until they perceive that it's actually beneficial for their career to do this. There's a lot of cold start problem, right? Like you have to just use brute force to get it going before it starts to have some internal momentum.
Yeah, we recently, by the way, hosted our first ever Dasha community meetup, and we had the same problem where we had to force a couple of office hours just to teach speakers how to be a better speakers, right? To help them to prepare their slide decks, to help them with their narrative, right? To help them to prep actually to be these speakers, right? Yeah. So,
yeah. When they look good, you look good, right? So you need to make them look good. There's all this. This is a whole category of like, how do you build a community? That's a separate topic. But just in this area of like creating word of mouth, one of our OKRs is how many blog posts do our users write about us. So it's not our employees, not our DevRels, but our users.
And how do you promote this? I mean, like, how do you ensure that? How do you influence that? I mean, how do you influence how many users write blog posts about you? If this is an OKR, right? I mean, like, how do you?
Encourage them. Like, so, when you have conversations with them, so we have them in Slack and we have them in our forum. And whenever we have a good back and forth conversation, we'll say, hey, this could be a good blog post. I had one earlier this week, actually. So we had a discussion about Kubernetes and how to deploy on it and what the Kubernetes tooling ecosystem looks like today. And one of our community members had a very good perspective. He wrote up his notes on our discussion. And I said, why is this only in Slack? Like, why can't you just put this as a blog post? So a lot of it is just like encouraging people to come out of their shell. because maybe they're not, they don't view themselves as bloggers. They don't view themselves as like professional content creators, and they should not be. But their perspective is super meaningful because they're exactly the kind of people that you want to clone. So as much as you have the opportunity, encourage them to tweet or make a video, like literally, I will say things like, let's jump on a Zoom call. I will ghostwrite it for you. And as soon as you sign off, we'll post it on a blog. Like make it as easy as possible to remove all the barriers, but have their voice. That's the most important thing, to represent their voice in the community and say like, look, like other people like you are using us and they're happy with it. And this is why,
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. I mean, people always look at others. I mean, especially developers, right? I mean, and you have to break this ice, right? I mean, like some people do use you, right? But nobody knows about it and nobody writes about it, and like they're kind of shy maybe or something like that, right? And then you kind of help one to actually just like do like the coming out, right? And like say, all right, like I'm using this tool, right? And then the second guy, oh, I'm also using this tool, and suddenly you have a lot of awareness, and like suddenly a lot of people are using you, and which creates like credibility and helps other people to onboard, right?
Yeah, I'll say that that's true.
And so you mentioned that you're using Slack for your developer community. So like, why not Discord, for example?
Yep. The simple answer is that the kind of developers that we have are already in Slack all day long. So it's a network effect issue. I fundamentally prefer Discord's easy login and I guess authentication model. They also seem a bit more performant, and they're less annoying in general with their onboarding flow. But all those points are moot because our developers are in Slack anyway. So it depends where you are. I think there's a very uncomfortable split right now between Discord and Slack. Slack is essentially where enterprise developers hang out. And then Discord is where open source and crypto and like, fringe community hangs out. And so if you want to be enterprise, you probably need to be on Slack anyway. But definitely people feel much easier joining a Discord. It's much easier to join and leave a Discord than it is to join and leave a Slack. And I think that factors into whether or not people check you out. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I guess Prisma, like if we talk about some recent examples, I guess Prisma does a really great job in building their Slack community. So they have more than 40K members in their Slack community, which is insane, I guess, like, right? Like 40,000 members.
I don't know. How many are active?
Yeah, that's the question, right? And which brings us to
the only thing that 40K number tells you is that they promoted it very hard, and they've been around for a while, right? But like, yeah, not that many are active. I bet I'm in that 40K number. I'm just like, but I'm signed in to like 200 different Slacks, and I'm only active in like 3.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. We bring us to the second point, like the community building stuff. So we already discussed that you are using Slack community, but so how do you do community building? Like how do you increase community vibrance, right? Because as you said, like if you're not an active user, right, you do not have a community, right? So it's a question and answering board, right? It's not a community.
Okay, I'll give you my general thoughts on this, which I should probably write as a blog post, but I haven't done it yet. Okay, so a few things. What do you define as community? What is your success criteria as for community? For me, there are a couple of clear metrics. One is that members are talking to each other without your involvement, right? They're helping each other out. They're finding each other for advice, for jobs. That's a very big one. And then just for general, support, or just even talking about related like nothing to do with, stuff that's nothing to do with Temporal, nothing to do with Dasha, just like related tools. If you are the best place to find people to talk shop, then you have a very functioning and lively and active community. That's a wonderful thing. The second metric I really like to talk about is that people expect their association with you to outlast their current employment, meaning that they, going forward, will just use you in every company that they have, right? That is a real community. It's not a transactional, like, I only use you because my company picked you as a vendor, right? That's not a community, right? So how do you get there? It's a very long multi-year relationship, but that's the end goal that you should really strive for, because that's clearly a self-sustaining thing that's worthwhile building. Everything else is just engagement crap. Okay, so tools for doing this, the two which I really talk about, which is maybe three. Okay, so the first one is that content is the minimum viable community, in a sense that what distinguishes your community from a glorified support forum? It's people coming there to read stuff on their own without having like, hey, I have a bug in line 354. Tell me how to fix it, right? That's the difference between sort of a glorified support forum and like a community that actually cares about the industry, the craft, the ideas, stuff like that, right? So I think that's a really nice goal. I think it's a very difficult one to achieve, but I always think that content is the minimum viable community. I think about the people who do content for a living, people who do community for a living. You start out initially just by posting good posts, right? Like posting worthwhile updates that have a high signal to noise ratio, and that is just not option. No, like you have to do that if you want to have a viable community that attracts people and gets people to stay. What else can I say in that category? Yeah, I think so I'll just leave it there. But the other one that I really like is events. So if you think about the temperature of your interactions, there's cold interactions and then there's hot interactions. Cold would be like support, would be asynchronous, will be on forums. Chat is kind of warm in the sense that chat is also asynchronous, but it can upgrade to synchronous basically when both sides are on the same chat and they're going back and forth. That's a very, very nice medium. But where communication and community is hot is at events, meetups, conferences, stuff like that, where you're in person, face-to-face. And obviously that's very difficult today, but you can try to simulate some of that interaction with like a Zoom discussion. And eventually when the world reopens again, hopefully some in-person events, right? But those are hot and those are very amazing because they open you up to like just knowing in like what seems like minor details about each other, but maybe they may come in super useful in understanding the persona of your user, them getting to talk to each other about like just unrelated things, but they meet each other as part of your community. And as long as you start to become the venue where people can meet and are this flag bearer of whatever your industry is, then that's a very, very foundational place to be in. And I think events are also serving as a nice breaking point or nice chapter closing and beginning of a community, right? Like, so there's a clear before and after for an event. Like before something was announced, the community didn't know about it. After something was announced, everyone's talking about it. Everyone has a reason to get together and say like, hey, did you see what Dasha just launched? Like that's cool, right? Like otherwise communities are normally very cold because everything is asynchronous. Everything can be caught up at any point in time. You can always put a video in your watch later queue and then never watch it. It's those are not events, right? So how can you create memorable events that lets people say, I was there?
Yeah. And how do you know when you have a product market fit as a developer tool, as a developer product? How do you think? Is this like some kind of community metrics. When you have like a vibrant and growing community, it's actually the ever growing and the number of users and the retention of actually the product usage. Or like how would you structure, like what's the product market fit for a developer?
Oh wow. I am not an expert on this, but I can give you some ideas. So there are industry metrics that everybody talks about that may not necessarily be that helpful. So are you aware of a K factor, which is like it's just a measure of virality. How if one user joins.
Yeah. Measure of the virality, right? Exactly. Yes. Heard about it.
The problem is that if you're open source, then it's very hard to measure that. I think for you guys, probably you could measure K factor, and you want it to be like, you know, between 1 to 2 or something like that, and that's fine. Not, you know, if it's in there, you have some amount of product market fit. I do think it's hard to attribute. I think it's hard to know what goes into those things, but you can at least try and you can talk about it, and it's an industry accepted term. The other one, which I like a lot. So the other one, obviously, you could try measuring NPS. I think NPS is very easy to game because you can basically make sure that, well, first of all, everyone has done so many NPS surveys in our life that we know what you're doing. So the metric is spoiled by the people being observed know what the game is. Like I have coded NPS before, so like it's just less effective on me because like I know, like I know you only care about 9s and 10s. So anyway, so what I prefer recently is the Sean Ellis question, which is the superhumans sort of product market fit engine that they wrote up in the First Round Capital's new blog a few years ago. So how many people would be extremely disappointed if you went away, right? Is it 10%? Is it 40%? You get to some level of like, let's say 40%. It's never going to be 100%. And you focus on them. So basically, instead of NPS, like just having a number permanently high, focus on segmenting your audience and saying like, and having a really good base of people who just consider you as an essential part of their workflow or their life or their product. And then for those who are not so happy or who are don't really quite get it yet, that's a different segment that you can go after, that you can say, I can allot some of my engineering hours to making those people happy, to plugging feature gaps or to invent new stuff that would draw them in, stuff like that. So to me, that is more useful than saying an arbitrary point in time before and after product market fit. It's not a one point in time thing. You're constantly improving it. So I much rather have a framework or a measurement that just shows me my progress rather than saying I have arbitrarily reached like 95 in NPS. Yay, job done. I can go home now. No, that's stupid. Like, so yeah. There's that. Okay, and then one more thing let's talk about is in terms of specifically community, you want different levels of engagement, and the most, I guess, well thought out model so far, and it's a very, very basic model. It's called the Orbit model from orbit.love, where they have
we're using it.
Yeah, 4 concentric circles of like measuring activity. I don't think the reason I say it's the most simple model because like it just counts interactions and it counts the quality, and I don't think that the counting is particularly well tuned at all. Like we have some guy who like has 1,000 followers, and apparently this person is high reach versus people with 30,000 followers, and this person is equally high reach. Like that's obviously not true. So like they have a lot of work to do, and I've given them this feedback already, but at least they are the most advanced so far. So there's a lot of data collection that you can do. And I think it's possible to get too lost in the data. For me, as long as I have a positive surprise curve, this is my own metric, by the way. And positive surprise curve is not a real number. It's just a feeling that I have that when I'm surprised by the community, it's usually positive. Do you know what I mean? Like when I hear news, it's usually more positive, more interesting than I thought. This is an economic model, by the way. Like when economists measure the economy and the economic indicators, there's actually such a thing as a positive surprise curve from economists, basically saying how much the real results are differing from the expectations of results. And so if you have a positive surprise curve from your community, you know you're doing something right directionally. I don't care about the magnitude because it's hard to measure and be precise on this magnitude, but at least directionally we're going in the right way. I can work with that.
Right. No, that's really cool. So, and let's go back to this community minimum viable community thing. I really like it. So, let's say you showed me this Hacker News. Let's say you somehow bump it into like the front page of Hacker News, and you have, I don't know, like several hundreds, whatever, your new community members who just joined your community, right? And everybody's gonna keep in silence, right? Like, so they joined and they do nothing. Like, what do you do as a developer relation team in order to actually break the ice and increase the temperature of these interactions?
Well, it talks about events. And then also there's also this idea of a super users. So basically like a small group of people that have been shown to be experts in your tool and are very helpful to the community. So you want to give them some recognition. So some of this can be automated, like you accumulate karma on Stack Overflow or Discourse and stuff like that, and you can send out swag, or some amount of recognition is always helpful. And some developer relations experts actually say that this helps a lot. Like people will do a lot for a free T-shirt or a mug. It's just some recognition. I think it's motivational, but then also it's like a nice like thank you gesture from the company, right? Because they are essentially doing free work for you. But then also preferential access, like so I'm part of the Stripe community experts community. I'm part of GitHub stars and some of the smaller communities. But these they have monthly calls where they give us an idea of the upcoming roadmap, so we can give feedback and things that money cannot buy. If I already am a fan of the products and you give me these rewards, then I start being a super fan, and that's really helpful. That really helps to keep me connected and help me be an advocate of the company when this stuff rolls out. So I think the super user program essentially is what I'm talking about. I'll give you one example that I'm implementing at Temporal, which is when we have our all hands. We are going to ask we're going to offer our engineers to stay an extra day after the all hands, and then we fly in our users and we just have them meet each other. So that's a nice benefit for super users, that you get to give them some perks, and in the process just get to learn a bit more about them and understand their profile a bit better, so we can just make more of them.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Interesting, right? And what kind of events do you have in your developer relation person tool belt? I mean, well, first of all, meetups, right? I mean, maybe on a monthly basis, right? What kind of conferences? But I mean, like, you're not hosting a conference right now at the moment, right? It's more about attending the conferences. Like, what kind of other events do you consider to help your community grow?
Yeah, we're holding like one-off workshops as well. So that's one of our developer relations people is organizing that. So kind of workshop series where he has some prepared content that he's going to go through, and we are actually preparing to host our own conference. So for me, the metric is when you can hold 12 consecutive events where 50 people show up month after month. That's essentially a whole year of meetups. Then you should start hosting your own user conference already. The first conference will be very small, maybe 100 people, 150 people. But eventually you can start to grow it to at least like 300-400 500-600. That's a very, very large community already, because not everyone will show up, right? So this is a way for you to create
300 like actual attendees, right? Not
yeah. A lot of them, I mean, some of them will be VC, some of them will be like, just vendors. So I mean, but all that is good. All that is just an indication that people are interested, and the events helps you create content that you can post on your YouTube and stuff like that. As for other events, I honestly don't know. Like I flew into San Francisco and I had 2 days of meeting users, and I went to their office and I talked to them, and then that's it. We got coffee together. Those are events as well, just because, but they're less formal, right? I just showed up at their office essentially, but at least I got to know them. They got to meet me. They trust me more. Yeah, and I don't know. I don't think I'm an events expert. I bet you could come up with more events than I do.
Yeah, how do you think, like, what's the difference between someone who is great at developer relations from someone who's outstanding?
Oh, wow. Interesting. I think someone who is outstanding essentially redefines what you think developer relations is. Like it opens your mind as to what the boundaries or what is possible with developer relations. I think someone who's great at the job can do the job as you think the job should be done. But someone who's outstanding redefines the job, right? Like opens your mind as to like, I did not know that this is an underrated venue, or just like, this person has such deep insight, or this person profoundly affected the way that our community influences our product development. These are just like untouched areas, whereas like a standard developer relations person would just be like, okay, I'll produce like 3 YouTube videos this month, and like maybe 2 blog posts, and then I'll fly to like 5 different conferences. That's very routine. There are 1,000 of those people, and that's fine. They just kind of are unappealing in the sense of, they're there like they fill that job. That anyone in that job would do that, but someone who's outstanding would sort of define their own job and just kind of experiment with new ways to reach people, and maybe not be so I'll give you one example. Someone who did that for me recently was Brian Douglas at GitHub. He was GitHub's first or second DevRel, and he said something which really affected me, which was essentially that a lot of developer advocates are the endpoints for their content, right? They are the sole people in their company responsible for creating content. You see their face all over the place. What if developer relations assisted the rest of the company to create more content? So it was a service role rather than a fulfillment role. In other words, like, think about HR, right? HR doesn't do the hiring for you. HR helps you hire. So individual teams hire better because there's an HR team present to take away all the responsibilities of HR. Does this make sense to you?
No, I mean, that's perfectly does, because this is something we're tackling like at Dasha right now. So because we have a very highly engineering team, right? And a lot of software engineers that are really great, and they have a lot to like talk about, and nobody writes about these kind of topics, at least like that in depth usually. But the problem is like they need some help from the outside, from somebody like a developer relation person, right, to help them actually to get this word out of their heads, right? Like to help them structure the narrative, to help them to educate them how to do that, to help them, to encourage them so they could they could allocate this time during their working hours, right, to actually write this great content, because it takes time, right? Because usually, okay, like I'm a software developer, what did you do? Okay, I'm going to be writing code today, right? But no, you're not going to be writing code today. You're going to be writing blog posts, right? And so that's kind of, and people kind of encouragement.
people love hearing from real engineers, and unfortunately, DevRel is not real engineering, right? Air quotes, because you're not maintaining a production system. It just isn't like, there's a lot of people who try to be nice and say like, yeah, you are still a real engineer if you can still write code, but you don't maintain a production system. And that is different from a regular engineer's job. So people like hearing from the people who wrote the thing that they're going to use, and who are maybe not career developer relations, but at least they can be coached in speaking, and they can have help in producing slides. And you basically just lower the barrier in every form of the word to engineers and the rest of the company producing content. And also, like, why keep that to employees? Like, you can also help users produce content as well.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting kind of follow-up question. So how do you think developer relation person should be first and foremost a great engineer herself or not?
Yeah, I think it helps a lot. I don't think it's necessary. So why do I say this? At some point, at some point it's hard. Like, if they're a great engineer, as a CEO, you probably want to put them on engineering. Right? Those great engineers are hard to find. So there's just a practical solution of like resource allocation, but then also there's always some parts of the role where you don't know everything, right? As a dev advocate, you're not paid to know everything. You're paid to know the people who know everything. So I actually think I'm actually a bit nihilist about this, in the sense that as long as they can give a good demo, then I don't care how good of an engineer they are. Because when people ask follow-up questions, all they need to do is say, I don't know the answer, but here's the contact for the person who does, right? That's it. You can be a router. Like, imagine being a DevRel for AWS, where there are 260 services. You're not going to know all 260 services. At best, you're an expert in one of them. It's fine, but you can route people. And in fact, like, maybe that's all you need to do, is just you need to do really good demos, and then you need to route people.
Yeah.
But that's an extreme view. I will say that obviously I have more respect for DevRels who are also in themselves very good engineers.
Yeah, because I'm an engineer myself, and I tend to, to gravitate towards that notion of that the developer relation person, like, first and foremost should be an engineer herself and be able to actually ship the code, right? And that's probably where early in their career, when they ship like lots of code, but then they want to educate other developers, right? They want to help other developers, and they have this kind of internal feeling of an internal willing of helping people, right? So, but because otherwise, if you're not an engineer, or you're kind of not a really experienced engineer, you probably, and like specifically if we're talking about developer tools, you probably will harm the company brand, right? I mean, like, if there is a great distributed kind of system experts, engineers, like senior engineers, right, asking you a question, and you're like, let me kind of ask our CEO because he knows that kind of stuff. That's probably not super cool, right?
Look, like, you're talking about the ideal situation. All I'm saying is that it's hard. Like, if you have these higher requirements, then you're going to struggle a bit harder to find these engineers who are great engineers themselves and then don't mind doing DevRel. So obviously, the ideal is just have everything.
Yeah.
So I'm showing you the areas where I'm willing to compromise. But obviously, like, let me give you two other things. So one is that I think there's a strong sense of influencer marketing with DevRel, right? Like, basically, honestly, a lot of DevRels are effective because people who follow them want to be like them, right? And I want to be like the really good engineers that I see. I want to do what they do. I want to use the tools that they use. And if they say something is good, I'm more likely to believe them because they have credibility in engineering. So of course, good engineers are very effective DevRels. Just that a lot of them don't want to do the job. That's all. So it's tricky. It's tricky. So the other part that you can do, which is you can assign your DevRels an engineering rotation. So that's something that we did at Netlify, where 1 quarter of the year, which is literally 3 months out of the 12 months, you're embedded in an engineering team and you have no DevRel responsibility. So you keep fresh as an engineer. I would say that that's a nice option to offer, but it's a little bit disruptive to your engineering team. So your EM has to be okay with it. And then you also need to just be aware that like part of this is a little bit for show. So you're still not maintaining the system over, you know, you have a little bit of a taste of it. You're still a tourist. So yeah, but there are ways to counteract this problem. And obviously, the more engineering credibility you have, the better. And yeah, that's as much as I'll say to that, really.
Yeah, and so the question is, well, what's your advice on hiring? Because I think this is relevant for a lot of your audience and like startups in DevRel tools and developer tools. Like, how to hire a first developer relation person?
Oh my god!
This is such a big problem. One, not second, not third. Like how to hire first, right?
Yeah. So I think there's two paths. So first is you hire someone who is a sort of senior, essentially the team lead, who can have the capacity to essentially hire their own DevRels to work with them, or you can hire someone junior, who is like a prototype DevRel, and they execute on your ideas, your vision. Obviously, the junior is easier to hire, and I think the challenge with the team lead hire as the first hire is a lot of the times they will come from a different community, and there's a chance that they may not get your product. Even though they're an experienced DevRel, like I don't think DevRel is transferable. I think DevRel is domain specific. So they really have to come from your community. And in fact, a lot of like the ideal hire is someone who is already using you that you would like to clone, particularly if they've successfully advocated for you to be for their company to purchase your services, like to be a paying customer, because that's kind of that's the hardest and highest most sort of skin in the game DevRel that there is, which is you're kind of putting your career on the line when you say, hey, I really like this vendor. They're doing a good job. Here's all the reasons why. Like they've already done the job of DevRel when they do that, right? And so you want to hire them, especially because I think a lot of DevRels focus on free tier as well, because that's the easiest top of funnel thing to do. But that's not helpful to you as a company, because you need them to convert from free tier to paying tier. And if your DevRel only focuses on free tier offerings and doesn't know what it's like to do a full comparison and like talk about the paying tier and understand the gaps in the products and just empathize with people who are going to pay for the products, then they're not going to produce as many paying customers as someone who has been through that process. So basically, like the advice here is to pick someone in your community that you would most like to clone. And if you can clone them successfully, then then that's a really good DevRel. I have been saying this for a while, but then also I recognize that it's very hard to do, because essentially what you're also doing is you're stealing an employee from one of your best customers. So you need to make sure that you don't ruin that relationship. I think it's okay. I think sometimes people just want to move on, or sometimes people just fall in love with your technology so much that they want to take a career swing on you. I think that's possible to do, and all you have to do is just saying you're looking for someone, and it doesn't have to be like, can you join us? It's just more, hey, by the way, we're looking for someone. If you know of anyone suitable, let me know. And if they are thinking of it, they'll volunteer themselves. But otherwise, I think for a first DevRel hire, like, don't wait 12 months to try to fill this with like the ideal team lead candidate. Maybe all you need is a junior to execute on DevRel or content ideas that you already have. Because I think that the most authentic DevRel is honestly the founder when you're just starting out, right? So why not just get someone to help you out with that?